Hello everyone. Have a nice evening and listen to a good book to stay away from stress before falling asleep. Today's video, I will tell you a very detailed and profound biographical work about the life and career of Elon Musk, one of the most famous founders and inventors of the modern world. Published by author Walter Isaacson in 2023. Reviews of the book. With Elon Musk, Walter Isaacson not only offers a vivid portrait of the subject's dynamic life up to the present day, but also provides convincing answers. Wall Street Journal. No matter what you think of Musk, he is someone worth understanding, and that makes this book worth reading. The Economist. Isaacson has gathered information from both Musk's admirers and critics. He presents everything clearly. The book contains countless stories, a highly engaging work about one of America's most brilliant innovators. New York Journal of Books. One of America's greatest biographers has written an extensive book about the world's richest man. This biography, based on more than 100 interviews, the story of an arrogant, brilliant, sometimes ruthless character whose very ambitions are actively shaping the future of mankind. Ron Charles on CBS Sunday Morning. A comprehensive study by an experienced biographer. The Observer. Walter Isaacson's biography touches on everything. The portrait of this technology pioneer is truly captivating. The Telegraph. The Playground. As a kid growing up in South Africa, Elon Musk knew pain and learned how to survive it. When he was 12, he was taken by bus to a wilderness survival camp known as a Veldschool. It was a paramilitary Lord of the Flies, he recalls. The kids were each given small rations of food and water, and they were allowed, indeed encouraged, to fight over them. Bullying was considered a virtue, his younger brother Kimball says. The big kids quickly learned to punch the little ones in the face and take their stuff. Elon, who was small and emotionally awkward, got beaten up twice. He would end up losing 10 pounds. Near the end of the first week, the boys were divided into two groups and told to attack each other. It was so insane, mind-blowing, Musk recalls. Every few years, one of the kids would die. The counselors would recount such stories as warnings. "Don't be stupid like that dumb fuck who died last year," they would say. "Don't be the weak dumb fuck." The second time Elon went to Veldschool, he was about to turn 16. He had gotten much bigger, bursting up to 6 feet with a bear-like frame, and had learned some judo. So Veldschool wasn't so bad. I realized by then that if someone bullied me, I could punch them very hard in the nose, and then they wouldn't bully me again. They might beat the shit out of me, but if I had punched them hard in the nose, they wouldn't come after me again. South Africa in the 1980s was a violent place, with machine gun attacks and knife killings common. Once, when Elon and Kimball got off a train on their way to an anti-apartheid music concert, they had to wade through a pool of blood next to a dead person with a knife still sticking out of his brain. For the rest of the evening, the blood on the soles of their sneakers made a sticky sound against the pavement. The Musk family kept German Shepherd dogs that were trained to attack anyone running by the house. When he was 6, Elon was racing down the driveway and his favorite dog attacked him, taking a massive bite out of his back. In the emergency room, when they were preparing to stitch him up, he resisted being treated until he was promised that the dog would not be punished. "You're not going to kill him, are you?" Elon asked. They swore that they wouldn't. In recounting the story, Musk pauses and stares vacantly for a very long time. Then they damn well shot the dog dead. His most searing experiences came at school. For a long time, he was the youngest and smallest student in his class. He had trouble picking up social cues. Empathy did not come naturally, and he had neither the desire nor the instinct to be ingratiating. As a result, he was regularly picked on by bullies, who would come up and punch him in the face. If you have never been punched in the nose, you have no idea how it affects you the rest of your life, he says. At assembly one morning, a student who was horsing around with a gang of friends bumped into him. Elon pushed him back. Words were exchanged. The boy and his friends hunted Elon down at recess and found him eating a sandwich. They came up from behind, kicked him in the head, and pushed him down a set of concrete steps. They sat on him and just kept beating the shit out of him and kicking him in the head, says Kimball, who had been sitting with him. When they got finished, I couldn't even recognize his face. It was such a swollen ball of flesh that you could barely see his eyes. He was taken to the hospital and was out of school for a week. Decades later, he was still getting corrective surgery to try to fix the tissues inside his nose. But those scars were minor compared to the emotional ones inflicted by his father, Elon Musk, an engineer, rogue, and charismatic fantasist who to this day bedevils Elon. After the school fight, Errol sided with the kid who pummeled Elon's face. The boy had just lost his father to suicide, and Elon had called him stupid, Errol says. Elon had this tendency to call people stupid. How could I possibly blame that child? When Elon finally came home from the hospital, his father berated him. I had to stand for an hour as he yelled at me and called me an idiot and told me that I was just worthless, Elon recalls. Kimball, who had to watch the tirade, says it was the worst memory of his life. My father just lost it, went ballistic, as he often did. He had zero compassion. Both Elon and Kimball, who no longer speak to their father, say his claim that Elon provoked the attack is unhinged and that the perpetrator ended up being sent to juvenile prison for it. They say their father is a volatile fabulist, regularly spinning tales that are larded with fantasies, sometimes calculated and at other times delusional. He has a Jekyll and Hyde nature, they say. One minute he would be friendly, the next he would launch into an hour or more of unrelenting abuse. He would end every tirade by telling Elon how pathetic he was. Elon would just have to stand there, not allowed to leave. It was mental torture, Elon says, pausing for a long time and choking up slightly. He sure knew how to make anything terrible. When I call Errol, he talks to me for almost 3 hours and then follows up regularly, with calls and texts over the next 2 years. He is eager to describe and send me photos of the nice things he provided to his kids, at least during the periods when his engineering business was doing well. At one point he drove a Rolls-Royce, built a wilderness lodge with his boys, and got raw emeralds from a mine owner in Zambia, until that business collapsed. But he admits that he encouraged a physical and emotional toughness. Their experiences with me would have made Veldskul quite tame, he says, adding that violence was simply part of the learning experience in South Africa. Two held you down while another pummeled your face with a log and so on. New boys were forced to fight the school thug on their first day at a new school. He proudly concedes that he exercised an extremely stern streetwise autocracy with his boys. Then he makes a point of adding, Elon would later apply that same stern autocracy to himself and others. Adversity shaped me. Someone once said that every man is trying to live up to his father's expectations or make up for his father's mistakes, Barack Obama wrote in his memoirs. And I suppose that may explain my particular malady. In Elon Musk's case, his father's impact on his psyche would linger despite many attempts to banish him, both physically and psychologically. Elon's moods would cycle through light and dark, intense and goofy, detached and emotional, with occasional plunges into what those around him dreaded as demon mode. Unlike his father, he would be caring with his kids, but in other ways, his behavior would hint at a danger that needed to be constantly battled. The specter that, as his mother put it, he might become his father. It's one of the most resonant tropes in mythology. To what extent does the epic quest of the Star Wars hero require exorcising demons bequeathed by Darth Vader and wrestling with the dark side of the Force? With a childhood like his in South Africa, I think you have to shut yourself down. Emotionally in some ways, says his first wife Justine, the mother of 5 of his surviving 10 children. If your father is always calling you a moron and idiot, maybe the only response is to turn off anything inside that would have opened up an emotional dimension that he didn't have tools to deal with. This emotional shutoff valve could make him callous, but it also made him a risk-seeking innovator. He learned to shut down fear, she says. If you turn off fear, then maybe you have to turn off other things, like joy or empathy. The PTSD from his childhood also instilled in him an aversion to contentment. I just don't think he knows how to savor success and smell the flowers, says Claire Boucher, the artist known as Grimes, who is the mother of 3 of his other children. I think he got conditioned in childhood that life is pain. Musk agrees. Adversity shaped me, he says. My pain threshold became very high. During a particularly hellish period of his life in 2008, after the first 3 launches of his SpaceX rockets exploded and Tesla was about to go bankrupt, He would wake up thrashing and recount to Tallulah Riley, who became his second wife, the horrendous things his father had once said. I'd heard him use those phrases himself, she says. It had a profound effect on how he operates. When he recalled these memories, he would zone out and seem to disappear behind his steel-colored eyes. I think he wasn't conscious of how that still affected him because he thought of it as something in his childhood, Riley says. But he's retained a childlike, almost stunted side. Inside the man, he's still there as a child standing in front of his dad. Out of this cauldron, Musk developed an aura that made him seem, at times, like an alien, as if his Mars mission were an aspiration to return home and his desire to build humanoid robots were a quest for kinship. You'd not be totally shocked if he ripped off his shirt and you discovered that he had no navel and was not of this planet born. But his childhood also made him all too human, a tough yet vulnerable boy who decided to embark on epic quests. He developed a fervor that cloaked his goofiness and a goofiness that cloaked his fervor. Slightly uncomfortable in his own body, like a big man who was never an athlete, he would walk with the stride of a mission-driven bear and dance jigs that seemed taught by a robot. With the conviction of a prophet, he would speak about the need to nurture the flame of human consciousness, fathom the universe, and save our planet. At first I thought this was mainly role-playing, the team-boosting pep talks and podcast fantasies of a man-child who had read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy once too often. But the more I encountered it, the more I came to believe that his sense of mission was part of what drove him. While other entrepreneurs struggled to develop a worldview, he developed a cosmic view. His heritage and breeding, along with the hardwiring of his brain, made him at times callous and impulsive. It also led to an exceedingly high tolerance for risk. He could calculate it coldly and also embrace it feverishly. Elon wants risk for its own sake, says Peter Thiel, who became his partner in the early days of PayPal. He seems to enjoy it, indeed at times be addicted to it. He became one of those people who feels most alive when a hurricane is coming. I was born for a storm, and a calm does not suit me, Andrew Jackson once said. Likewise with Musk. He developed a siege mentality that included an attraction, sometimes a craving, for storm and drama, both at work and in the romantic relationships he struggled and failed to maintain. He thrived on crises, deadlines, and wild surges of work. When he faced tortuous challenges, the strain would often keep him awake at night and make him vomit. But it also energized him. He is a drama magnet, says Kimball. That's his compulsion, the theme of his life. When I was reporting on Steve Jobs, his partner Steve Wozniak said that the big question to ask was, did he have to be so mean, so rough and cruel, so drama-addicted? When I turned the question back to Woz at the end of my reporting, he said that if he had run Apple, he would have been kinder. He would have treated everyone there like family and not summarily fired people. Then he paused and added, but if I had run Apple, we may never have made the Macintosh. And thus the question about Elon Musk. Could he have been more chill and still be the one launching us toward Mars and an electric vehicle future? At the beginning of 2022, after a year marked by SpaceX making 31 successful rocket launches, Tesla selling close to 1 million cars, and him becoming the richest man on Earth, Musk spoke ruefully about his compulsion to stir up dramas. I need to shift my mindset away from being in crisis mode, he told me, which it has been in for about 14 years now, or arguably most of my life. It was a wistful comment, not a New Year's resolution. Even as he made the pledge, he was secretly buying up shares of Twitter, the world's ultimate playground. That April, he snuck away to the Hawaiian house of his mentor Larry Ellison, founder of Oracle, accompanied by the actress Natasha Bassett, an occasional girlfriend. He had been offered a board seat at Twitter, but over the weekend he concluded that wasn't enough. It was in his nature to want total control. So he decided he would make a hostile bid to buy the company outright. Then he flew to Vancouver to meet Grimes. There he stayed up with her until 5 a.m. playing a new war and empire building game, Elden Ring. Right after he finished, he pulled the trigger on his plan and went on Twitter. I made an offer, he announced. Over the years, whenever he was in a dark place or felt threatened, it took him back to the horrors of being bullied on the playground. Now he had the chance to own the playground. One adventurers, Joshua and Winifred Haldeman. Elon Musk's attraction to risk was a family trait. In that regard, he took after his maternal grandfather, Joshua Haldeman, a daredevil adventurer with strongly held opinions who was raised on a farm on the barren plains of central Canada. He studied chiropractic techniques in Iowa, then returned to his hometown near Moose Jaw, where he broke in horses and gave chiropractic adjustments in exchange for food and lodging. He was eventually able to buy his own farm, but he lost it during the Depression of the 1930s. For the next few years, he worked as a cowboy, rodeo performer, and construction hand. His one constant was a love for adventure. He married and divorced, traveled as a hobo on freight trains, and was a stowaway on an ocean-going ship. The loss of his farm instilled in him a populism, and he became active in a movement known as the Social Credit Party, which advocated giving citizens free credit notes they could use like currency. The movement had a conservative fundamentalist streak tinged with anti-Semitism. Its first leader in Canada decried a perversion of cultural ideals because a disproportionate number of Jews occupy positions of control. Haldeman rose to become chair of the party's National Council. He also enlisted in a movement called technocracy, which believed that government should be run by technocrats rather than politicians. It was temporarily outlawed in Canada because of its opposition to the country's entry into World War II. Haldeman defied the ban by taking out a newspaper ad supporting the movement. At one point, he wanted to learn ballroom dancing, which is how he met Winifred Fletcher, whose adventurous streak was equal to his. As a 16-year-old, she got a job at the Moose Jaw Times-Herald, but she dreamed of being a dancer and actress. So she lit out by train to Chicago and then New York City. Upon her return, she opened a dance school in Moose Jaw, which is where Haldeman showed up for lessons. When he asked her to dinner, she replied, "I don't date my clients." So he quit the class and asked her out again. A few months later, he asked, "When will you marry me?" She responded, "Tomorrow." They had 4 children, including twin girls, May and Kay, born in 1948. One day on a trip, he spotted a for sale sign on a single-engine Luscombe airplane sitting in a farmer's field. He had no cash, but he convinced the farmer to take his car in exchange. It was rather impetuous, since Haldeman did not know how to fly. He hired someone to fly him home and teach him how to pilot the plane. The family came to be known as the Flying Haldemans, and he was described by a chiropractic trade journal as perhaps the most remarkable figure in the history of flying chiropractors, a rather narrow, albeit accurate, accolade. They bought a larger single-engine plane, a Balanca, when May and Kay were 3 months old, and the toddlers became known as the Flying Twins. With his quirky conservative populist views, Haldeman came to believe that the Canadian government was usurping too much control over the lives of individuals and that the country had gone soft. So in 1950, he decided to move to South Africa, which was still ruled by a white apartheid regime. They took apart the Balanca, crated it, and boarded a freighter for Cape Town. Haldeman decided he wanted to live inland, so they took off toward Johannesburg, where most of the white citizens spoke English rather than Afrikaans. But as they flew over nearby Pretoria, the lavender jacaranda flowers were in bloom, and Haldeman announced, "This is where we'll stay." When Joshua and Winifred were young, a charlatan named William Hunt, known, at least to himself, as the Great Farini, came to Moose Jaw and told tales of an ancient, lost city he had seen when crossing the Kalahari Desert in South Africa. This fabulist showed my grandfather pictures that were obviously fake, but he became a believer and decided it was his mission to rediscover it, Musk says. Once in Africa, the Haldemans made a month-long trek into the Kalahari every year to search for this legendary city. They hunted for their own food and slept with their guns so they could fend off lions. The family adopted a motto, "Live dangerously, carefully." They embarked on long-distance flights to places such as Norway, tied for first place in the 12,000-mile Cape Town, to Algiers Motor Rally, and became the first to fly a single-engine plane from Africa to Australia. They had to remove the back seats to put in gas tanks, May later recalled. Joshua Haldeman's risk-taking eventually caught up with him. He was killed when a person he was teaching to fly hit a power line, causing the plane to flip and crash. His grandson Elon was 3 at the time. He knew that real adventures involve risk, he says. Risk energized him. Haldeman imprinted that spirit onto one of his twin girls, Elon's mother, May. "I know that I can take a risk as long as I'm prepared," she says. As a young student, she did well in science and math. She was also strikingly good-looking. Tall and blue-eyed, with high cheekbones and sculpted chin, she began working at age 15 as a model, doing department store runway shows on Saturday mornings. Around that time, she met a boy in her neighborhood who was also strikingly good-looking, albeit in a smooth and caddish way. Elon Musk. Elon Musk was an adventurer and wheeler-dealer, always on the lookout for the next opportunity. His mother, Cora, was from England, where she finished school at 14, worked at a factory making skins for fighter bombers, then took a refugee ship to South Africa. There she met Walter Musk, a cryptographer and military intelligence officer who worked in Egypt on schemes to fool the Germans by deploying fake weapons and searchlights. After the war, he did little other than sit silently in an armchair, drink, and use his cryptology skills on crossword puzzles. So Cora left him, went back to England with their 2 sons, bought a Buick, and then returned to Pretoria. "She was the strongest person I ever met," Errol says. Errol earned a degree in engineering and worked on building hotels, shopping centers, and factories. On the side, he liked restoring old cars and planes. He also dabbled in politics, defeating an Afrikaner member of the pro-apartheid National Party to become Elon Musk. Elon Musk was an adventurer and wheeler-dealer, always on the lookout for the next opportunity. His mother, Cora, was from England, where she finished school at 14, worked at a factory making skins for fighter bombers, then took a refugee ship to South Africa. There she met Walter Musk, a cryptographer and military intelligence officer who worked in Egypt on schemes to fool the Germans by deploying fake weapons and searchlights. After the war, he did little other than sit silently in an armchair, drink, and use his cryptology skills on crossword puzzles. So Cora left him, went back to England with their 2 sons, bought a Buick, and then returned to Pretoria. "She was the strongest person I ever met," Errol says. Errol earned a degree in engineering and worked on building hotels, shopping centers, and factories. On the side, he liked restoring old cars and planes. He also dabbled in politics, defeating an Afrikaner member of the pro-apartheid National Party to become one of the few English-speaking members of the Pretoria City Council. The Pretoria News from March 9, 1972, reported the election under the headline "Reaction Against the Establishment." Like the Haldemans, he loved flying. He bought a twin-engine Cessna Golden Eagle, which he used to ferry television crews to a lodge he had built in the bush. On one trip in 1986, when he was looking to sell the plane, he landed at an airstrip in Zambia where a Panamanian-Italian entrepreneur offered to buy it. They agreed on a price, and instead of taking a payment in cash, Errol was given a portion of the emeralds produced at 3 small mines that the entrepreneur owned in Zambia. Zambia then had a post-colonial black government, but there was no functioning bureaucracy, so the mine was not registered. If you registered it, you would wind up with nothing, because the blacks would take everything from you, Errol says. He criticizes May's family for being racist, which he insists he is not. "I don't have anything against the blacks, but they are just different from what I am," he says in a rambling phone discourse. Errol, who never had an ownership stake in the mine, expanded his trade by importing raw emeralds and having them cut in Johannesburg. "Many people came to me with stolen parcels," he says. "On trips overseas, I would sell emeralds to jewelers. It was a cloak and dagger thing, because none of it was legal." After producing profits of roughly $210,000, his emerald business collapsed in the 1980s when the Russians created an artificial emerald in the lab. He lost all of his emerald earnings. Tear marriage. Elon Musk and May Haldeman began dating when they were young teenagers. From the start, their relationship was filled with drama. He repeatedly proposed to her, but she didn't trust him. When she discovered he was cheating on her, she became so upset that she cried for a week and couldn't eat. "Because of grief, I dropped 10 pounds, she recalls. It helped her win a local beauty contest. She got $150 in cash plus 10 tickets to a bowling alley and became a finalist in the Miss South Africa contest. When May graduated from college, she moved to Cape Town to give talks about nutrition. Errol came to visit, brought an engagement ring, and proposed. He promised he would change his ways and be faithful once they were married. May had just broken off a relationship with another unfaithful boyfriend, gained a lot of weight, and begun to fear that she would never get married, so she agreed. The night of the wedding, Errol and May took an inexpensive flight to Europe for their honeymoon. In France, he bought copies of Playboy, which was banned in South Africa, and lay on the small hotel bed looking at them, much to May's annoyance. Their fights turned bitter. When they got back to Pretoria, she thought of trying to get out of the marriage, but she soon became nauseated from morning sickness. She had become pregnant on the second night of their honeymoon in the town of Nice. It was clear that marrying him had been a mistake, she recalls, but now it was impossible to undo. 2. A mind of his own, lonely and determined. At 7:30 on the morning of June 28, 1971, May Musk gave birth to an 8-pound, 8-ounce boy with a very large head. At first, she and Errol were going to name him Nice, after the town in France where he was conceived. History may have been different, or at least amused, if the boy had to go through life with the name Nice Musk. Instead, in the hope of making the Haldemans happy, Errol agreed that the boy would have names from that side of the family. Elon, after May's grandfather J. Elon Haldeman, and Reeve, the maiden name of May's maternal grandmother. Errol liked the name Elon because it was biblical, and he later claimed that he had been prescient. As a child, he says, he heard about a science fiction book by the rocket scientist Wernher von Braun called Project Mars, which describes a colony on the planet run by an executive known as the Elon. Elon cried a lot, ate a lot, and slept little. At one point, May decided to just let him cry until he fell asleep, but she changed her mind after neighbors called the police. His mood switched rapidly. When he wasn't crying, his mother says, he was really sweet. Over the next 2 years, May had 2 more children, Kimball and Tosca. She didn't coddle them. They were allowed to roam freely. There was no nanny, just a housekeeper who paid little attention when Elon began experimenting with rockets and explosives. He says he's surprised he made it through childhood with all of his fingers intact. When he was 3, his mother decided that because he was so intellectually curious he should be in nursery school. The principal tried to dissuade her, pointing out that being younger than anyone else in the class would present social challenges. They should wait another year. I can't do that, May said. He needs someone besides me to talk to. I really have this genius child. She prevailed. It was a mistake. Elon had no friends, and by the time he was in 2nd grade he was tuning out. The teacher would come up to me and yell at me, but I would not really see or hear her, he says. His parents got called in to see the principal, who told them, "We have reason to believe that Elon is retarded. He spent most of his time in a trance, not listening," one of his teachers explained. "He looks out of the window all the time, and when I tell him to pay attention he says, 'The leaves are turning brown now.'" Errol replied that Elon was right. The leaves were turning brown. The impasse was broken when his parents agreed that Elon's hearing should be tested, as if that might be the problem. They decided it was an ear problem, so they took my adenoids out, he says. That calmed down the school officials, but it did nothing to change his tendency to zone out and retreat into his own world when thinking. Ever since I was a kid, if I start to think about something hard, then all of my sensory systems turn off, he says. I can't see or hear or anything. I'm using my brain to compute, not for incoming information. The other kids would jump up and down and wave their arms in his face to see if they could summon back his attention. But it didn't work. It's best not to try to break through when he has that vacant stare, his mother says. Compounding his social problems was his unwillingness to suffer politely those he considered fools. He used the word stupid often. Once he started going to school, he became so lonely and sad, his mother says. Kimball and Tosca would make friends on the first day and bring them home, but Elon never brought friends home. He wanted to have friends, but he just didn't know how. As a result, he was lonely, very lonely, and that pain remained seared into his soul. When I was a child, there's one thing I said, he recalled in an interview with Rolling Stone during a tumultuous period in his love life in 2017. I never want to be alone. That's what I would say. I don't want to be alone. One day when he was 5, one of his cousins was having a birthday party, but Elon was punished for getting into a fight and told to stay home. He was a very determined kid, and he decided to walk on his own to his cousin's house. The problem was that it was on the other side of Pretoria, a walk of almost 2 hours. Plus, he was too young to read the road signs. I kind of knew what the route looked like because I had seen it from a car, and I was determined to get there, so I just started walking, he says. He managed to arrive just as the party was ending. When his mother saw him coming down the road, she freaked out. Fearing he would be punished again, he climbed a maple tree and refused to come down. Kimball remembers standing beneath the tree and staring at his older brother in awe. He has this fierce determination that blows your mind and was sometimes frightening, and still is. When he was 8, he focused his determination on getting a motorcycle. Yes, at age 8, he would stand next to his father's chair and make his case over and over. When his father picked up a newspaper and ordered him to be quiet, Elon would continue to stand there. It just was extraordinary to watch, Kimball says. He would stand there silently, then resume his argument, then stand silent. This happened every evening for weeks. His father finally caved and got Elon a blue and gold 50 cubic centimeters Yamaha. Elon also had a tendency to be spacey and wander off on his own, oblivious to what others were doing. On a family trip to Liverpool to see some of their relatives when he was 8, his parents left him and his brother in a park to play by themselves. It was not in his nature to stay put, so he started wandering the streets. Some kid found me crying and took me to his mom, who gave me milk and biscuits and called the police, he recalls. When he was reunited with his parents at the police station, he was unaware that anything was amiss. It was insane to leave me and my brother alone in a park at that age, he says, but my parents weren't overprotective like parents are today. Years later, I watched him at a solar roof construction site with his 2-year-old boy, known as X. It was 10 p.m., and there were forklifts and other moving equipment lit by 2 spotlights that cast big shadows. Musk put X on the ground so the boy could explore on his own, which he did without fear. As he poked around amid the wires and cables, Musk glanced at him occasionally, but refrained from intervening. Finally, after X started to climb on a moving spotlight, Musk walked over and picked him up. X squirmed and squealed, unhappy about being restrained. Musk would later even joke about, having Asperger's, a common name for a form of autism spectrum disorder that can affect a person's social skills, relationships, emotional connectivity, and self-regulation. He was never actually diagnosed as a kid, his mother says, but he says he has Asperger's, and I'm sure he's right. The condition was exacerbated by his childhood traumas. Whenever he would later feel bullied or threatened, his close friend Antonio Gracia says the PTSD from his childhood would hijack his limbic system, the part of the brain that controls emotional responses. As a result, he was bad at picking up social cues. I took people literally when they said something, he says, and it was only by reading books that I began to learn that people did not always say what they really meant. He had a preference for things that were more precise, such as engineering, physics, and coding. Like all psychological traits, Musk's were complex and individualized. He could be very emotional, especially about his own children, and he felt acutely the anxiety that comes from being alone. But he didn't have the emotional receptors that produce everyday kindness and warmth and a desire to be liked. He was not hardwired to have empathy. Or, to put it in less technical terms, he could be an asshole. Tay divorce. May and Elon Musk were at an Oktoberfest celebration with 3 other couples, drinking beer and having fun, when a guy at another table whistled at May and called her sexy. Errol was furious, but not at the guy. The way May remembers it, he lunged and was about to hit her, and a friend had to restrain him. She fled to her mother's house. Over time, he had gotten crazier, May later said. He would hit me when the kids were around. I remember that Elon, who was 5, would hit him on the backs of his knees to try to stop him. Errol calls the accusations absolute rubbish. He claims he adored May, and over the years he tried to win her back. I've never laid a hand on a woman in my life, and certainly none of my wives, he says. That's one of women's weapons, is to cry that the man abused her, to cry and to lie. And a man's weapons are to buy and to sign. On the morning after the Oktoberfest altercation, Errol came over to May's mother's house, apologized, and asked May to come back. "Don't you dare touch her again," Winifred Haldeman said. "If you do, she's coming to live with me." May said that he never hit her after that, but his verbal abuse continued. He would tell her that she was boring, stupid, and ugly. The marriage never recovered. Errol later admitted it was his fault. "I had a very pretty wife, but there were always prettier, younger girls," he said. "I really loved May, but I screwed up." They divorced when Elon was 8. May and the children moved to a house on the coast near Durban, about 380 miles south of the Pretoria, Johannesburg area, where she juggled jobs as a model and dietitian. There was little money. She bought her kids second-hand books and uniforms. On some weekends and holidays, the boys, but usually not Tosca, would take the train to see their father in Pretoria. He would send them back without any clothes or bags, so I had to buy them new clothes every time, she says. He said that I would eventually return to him because I would be so poverty-stricken and wouldn't be able to feed them. Often she would have to travel on a modeling job or to give a nutrition lecture, leaving the kids at home. "I never felt guilty about working full-time because I didn't have a choice," she says. "My children had to be responsible for themselves. The freedom taught them to be self-reliant. When they faced a problem, she had a stock response, 'You'll figure it out.' As Kimball recalls, Mom wasn't soft and cuddly, and she was always working, but that was a gift for us." Elon developed into a night person, staying up until dawn reading books. When he saw his mother's light go on at 6 a.m., he would crawl into bed and fall asleep. That meant she had trouble getting him up in time for school, and on nights when she was away, he would sometimes not get to class until 10 a.m. After getting calls from the school, Errol launched a custody battle and had subpoenas issued for Elon's teachers, May's modeling agent, and their neighbors. Right before going to trial, Errol dropped the case. Every few years, he would initiate another court action and then drop it. When Tosca recounts these tales, she begins to cry. "I remember Mom just sitting there, sobbing on the couch. I didn't know what to do. All I could do was to hold her." May and Errol were each drawn to dramatic intensity rather than domestic bliss, trait they would pass on. After her divorce, May began dating another abusive man. The children hated him and would occasionally put tiny firecrackers in his cigarettes that would explode when he lit up. Soon after the man proposed marriage, he got another woman pregnant. "She had been a friend of mine," May says. "We had modeled together." 3. Life with father. The move. At age 10, Musk made a fateful decision, one that he would later regret. He decided to move in with his father. He took the dangerous overnight train from Durban to Johannesburg on his own. When he spotted his father waiting for him at the station, he began beaming with delight. "Like the sun," Errol says. "Hi, Dad, let's get a hamburger," he shouted. That night, he crawled into his father's bed and slept there. Why did he decide to move in with his father? Elon sighs and stays silent for almost a minute when I ask this. "My dad was lonely, so lonely, and I felt I should keep him company," he finally says. "He used psychological wiles on me." He also adored his grandmother, Errol's mother Cora, known as Nana. She convinced him that it was unfair that his mother had all 3 children and his father had none. In some ways, the move was not all that mysterious. Elon was 10, socially awkward, and had no friends. His mother was loving, but she was overworked, distracted, and vulnerable. His father, in contrast, was swaggering and manly, a big guy with large hands and a mesmerizing presence. His career had many ups and downs, but at that time he was feeling flush. He owned a gold-colored convertible Rolls-Royce Corniche and, more importantly, 2 sets of encyclopedias, lots of books, and a variety of engineering tools. So Elon, still a small boy, chose to live with him. "It turned out to be a really bad idea," he says. "I didn't yet know how horrible he was." For years later, Kimball followed. "I didn't want to leave my brother alone with him," Kimball says. "My dad guilted my brother into going to live with him, and then he guilted me. Why did he choose to go live with someone who inflicted pain?" May Musk asked 40 years later, "Why didn't he prefer a happy home?" Then she paused for a moment. "Maybe that's just who he is." After the boys moved in, they helped Errol build a lodge that he could rent to tourists in the Timbavati Game Reserve, a pristine stretch of bush about 300 miles east of Pretoria. During construction, they slept around a fire at night, with Browning rifles to protect them against lions. The bricks were made of river sand, and the roof was grass. As an engineer, Errol liked studying the properties of various materials, and he made the floors out of mica because it was a good thermal insulator. Elephants in search of water often uprooted the pipes, and monkeys regularly broke into the pavilions and pooped, so there was a lot of work for the boys to do. Elon often accompanied visitors on hunts. Although he had only a .22 caliber rifle, it had a good scope, and he became an expert shot. He even won a local skeet shooting contest, though he was too young to accept the prize of a case of whiskey. When Elon was 9, his father took him, Kimball, and Tosca on a trip to America, where they drove from New York through the Midwest and then down to Florida. Elon became hooked on the coin-operated video games he found in the motel lobbies. "It was by far the most exciting thing," he said. "We didn't have that yet in South Africa." Errol displayed his mix of flamboyance and frugality. He rented a Thunderbird, but they stayed in budget inns. "When we got to Orlando, my father refused to take us to Disney World because it was too expensive," Musk recalls. "I think we went to some water park instead." As is often the case, Errol spins a different tale, insisting that they went both to Disney World, where Elon liked the haunted house ride, and to Six Flags over Georgia. "I told them over and over on the trip, America is where you will come live someday." 2 years later, he took the 3 children to Hong Kong. "My father had some combination of legitimate business and hucksterism," Musk recalls. "He left us in the hotel, which was pretty grungy, and just gave us $50 or something, and we didn't see him for 2 days. They watched samurai movies and cartoons on the hotel TV. Leaving Tosca behind, Elon and Kimball wandered the streets, going into electronics stores where they could play video games for free. Nowadays, someone would call the Child Protection Service if someone did what our dad did," Musk says. "But for us back then, it was a wondrous experience. A confederacy of cousins." After Elon and Kimball moved in with their father in suburban Pretoria, May moved to nearby Johannesburg so the family could be closer together. On Fridays, she would drive to Errol's house to pick up the boys. They would then go see their grandmother, the indomitable Winifred Haldeman, who cooked a chicken stew the kids hated so much that May would take them out for pizza afterward. Elon and Kimball usually spent the night at the house next door to their grandmother's, where May's sister Kay Rive and her 3 boys lived. The 5 cousins, Elon and Kimball Musk and Peter, Lyndon, and Russ Rive, became an adventurous and occasionally contentious bevy of bucks. May was more indulgent and less protective than her sister, so they would conspire with her when plotting an adventure. If we wanted to do something like go to a concert in Johannesburg, she would say to her sister, "I'm going to go take them to church camp this evening," says Kimball. Then she would drop us off, and we would go do our mischief. Those trips could be dangerous. I remember once when the train stopped, there was an immense fight, and we watched a guy get stabbed through the head, says Peter Rive. "We were hiding inside the car, then the doors closed, and we were like moving on. Sometimes a gang would board the train to hunt down rivals, rampaging through the cars shooting machine guns." Some of the concerts were anti-apartheid protests, such as one in 1985 in Johannesburg that drew 100,000 people. Often brawls would break out. "We didn't try to hide from the violence. We became survivors of it," says Kimball. "It taught us to not be afraid, but also to not do crazy things." Elon developed a reputation for being the most fearless. When the cousins went to a movie and people were making noise, he would be the one to go over and tell them to be quiet, even if they were much bigger. "It's a big theme for him to never have his decisions guided by fear," Peter recalls. "That was definitely present even when he was a child." He was also the most competitive of the cousins. One time when they were riding their bicycles from Pretoria to Johannesburg, Elon was way out in front, pedaling fast. So the others pulled over and hitched a ride in a pickup truck. When Elon rejoined them, he was so angry that he started hitting them. "It was a race," he said, "and they had cheated." Such fights were common. Often they would happen in public, the boys oblivious to their surroundings. One of the many that Elon and Kimball had was at a country fair. They were wrestling and punching each other in the dust, Peter recalls. People were freaking out, and I had to say to the crowd, "This is not a big deal. These guys are brothers." Although the fights were usually over small things, they could get vicious. The way to win was to be the first person to punch or kick the other guy in the balls, Kimball says. That would end the fight because you can't continue if you get crunched in the balls. The student. Musk was a good student, but not a superstar. When he was 9 and 10, he got A's in English and math. He is quick to grasp new mathematical concepts, his teacher noted. But there was a constant refrain in the report card comments. He works extremely slowly, either because he dreams or is doing what he should not. He seldom finishes anything. Next year he must concentrate on his work and not daydream during class. His compositions show a lively imagination, but he doesn't always finish in time. His average grade before he got to high school was 83 out of 100. After he was bullied and beaten in his public high school, his father moved him to a private academy, Pretoria Boys High School. Based on the English model, it featured strict rules, caning, compulsory chapel, and uniforms. There he got excellent grades in all but 2 subjects. Afrikaans, he got a 61 out of 100 his final year, and religious instruction, not extending himself, the teacher noted. I wasn't really going to put a lot of effort into things I thought were meaningless, he says. I would rather be reading or playing video games. He got an A in the physics part of his senior certificate exams, but somewhat surprisingly, only a B in the math part. In his spare time, he liked to make small rockets and experiment with different mixtures, such as swimming pool chlorine and brake fluid, to see what would make the biggest bang. He also learned magic tricks and how to hypnotize people, once convincing Tosca that she was a dog and getting her to eat raw bacon. As they would later do in America, the cousins pursued various entrepreneurial ideas. One Easter, they made chocolate eggs, wrapped them in foil, and sold them door to door. Kimball came up with an ingenious scheme. Instead of selling them cheaper than the Easter eggs at the store, they made them more expensive. Some people would balk at the price, he says, but we told them, "You're actually supporting future capitalists." Reading remained Musk's psychological retreat. Sometimes he would immerse himself in books all afternoon and most of the night, 9 hours at a stretch. When the family went to someone's house, he would disappear into their host's library. When they went into town, he would wander off and later be found at a bookstore, sitting on the floor in his own world. He was also deeply into comics. The single-minded passion of the superheroes impressed him. They're always trying to save the world, with their underpants on the outside or these skin-tight iron suits, which is really pretty strange when you think about it, he says. But they are trying to save the world. Musk read both sets of his father's encyclopedias and became, to his doting mother and sister, a genius boy. To other kids, however, he was an annoying nerd. "Look at the moon. It must be 1,000,000 miles away," a cousin once exclaimed. Replied Elon, "No, it's like 239,000 miles, depending on the orbit." One book that he found in his father's office described great inventions that would be made in the future. "I would come back from school and go to a side room in my father's office and read it over and over," he says. Among the ideas was a rocket propelled by an ion thruster, which would use particles rather than gas for thrust. Late one night at the control room of his rocket base in South Texas, Musk described the book at length to me, including how an ion thruster would work in a vacuum. "That book is what first made me think about going to other planets," he said. For the Seeker, Existential Crisis. When Musk was young, his mother started taking him to Sunday school at the local Anglican church, where she was a teacher. It did not go well. She would tell her class stories from the Bible, and he would question them. "What do you mean, the waters parted?" he asked. "That's not possible." When she told the story of Jesus feeding the crowd with loaves and fishes, he countered that things cannot materialize out of nothing. Having been baptized, he was expected to take communion, but he began questioning that as well. "I took the blood and body of Christ, which is weird when you're a kid," he says. "I said, what the hell is this? Is this a weird metaphor for cannibalism?" May decided to let Elon stay home and read on Sunday mornings. His father, who was more God-fearing, told Elon that there were things that could not be known through our limited senses and minds. "There are no atheist pilots," he would say, and Elon would add, There are no atheists at exam time. But Elon came to believe early on that science could explain things, and so there was no need to conjure up a creator or a deity that would intervene in our lives. When he reached his teens, it began to gnaw at him that something was missing. Both the religious and the scientific explanations of existence, he says, did not address the really big questions, such as where did the universe come from and why does it exist? Physics could teach everything about the universe except why. That led to what he calls his adolescent existential crisis. I began trying to figure out what the meaning of life and the universe was, he says, and I got real depressed about it. Like, maybe life may have no meaning. Like a good bookworm, he addressed these questions through reading. At first, he made the typical mistake of angsty adolescence and read existential philosophers, such as Nietzsche, Heidegger, and Schopenhauer. This had the effect of turning confusion into despair. I do not recommend reading Nietzsche as a teenager, he says. Fortunately, he was saved by science fiction, that wellspring of wisdom for game, playing kids with intellects on hyperdrive. He plowed through the entire sci-fi section in his school and local libraries, then pushed the librarians to order more. One of his favorites was Robert Heinlein's The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, a novel about a lunar penal colony. It is managed by a supercomputer, nicknamed Mike, that is able to acquire self-awareness and a sense of humor. The computer sacrifices its life during a rebellion at the penal colony. The book explores an issue that would become central to Musk's life. Will artificial intelligence develop in ways that benefit and protect humanity, or will machines develop intentions of their own and become a threat to humans? That topic is central to what became another of his favorites, Isaac Asimov's robot stories. The tales formulate laws of robotics that are designed to make sure robots do not get out of control. In the final scene of his 1985 novel Robots and Empire, Asimov expounds the most fundamental of these rules, dubbed the Zeroth Law. A robot may not harm humanity or, through inaction, allow humanity to come to harm. The heroes of Asimov's Foundation series of books develop a plan to send settlers to distant regions of the galaxy to preserve human consciousness in the face of an impending dark age. More than 30 years later, Musk unleashed a random tweet about how these ideas motivated his quest to make humans a spacefaring species and to harness artificial intelligence to be at the service of humans. Foundation series and Zeroth Law are fundamental to creation of SpaceX. The Hitchhiker's Guide. The science fiction book that most influenced his wonder years was Douglas Adams's The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The jaunty and wry tale helped shape Musk's philosophy and added a dollop of droll humor to his serious mien. The Hitchhiker's Guide, he says, helped me out of my existential depression, and I soon realized it was amazingly funny in all sorts of subtle ways. The story involves a human named Arthur Dent who is rescued by a passing spaceship seconds before the Earth is destroyed by an alien civilization that is building a hyperspace highway. Along with his alien rescuer, Dent explores various nooks and crannies of the galaxy, which is run by a two-headed president who had turned unfathomability into an art form. The denizens of the galaxy are trying to figure out the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. They build a supercomputer that after 7 million years spouts out the answer, 42. When that provokes a befuddled howl, the computer replies, "That quite definitely is the answer." I think the problem, to be quite honest with you, is that you've never actually known what the question is. That lesson stuck with Musk. I took from the book that we need to extend the scope of consciousness so that we are better able to ask the questions about the answer, which is the universe, he says. The Hitchhiker's Guide, combined with Musk's later immersion into video and tabletop simulation games, led to a lifelong fascination with the tantalizing thought that we might merely be pawns in a simulation devised by some higher-order beings. As Douglas Adams writes, there is a theory which states that if ever anyone discovers exactly what the universe is for and why it is here, it will instantly disappear and be replaced by something even more bizarre and inexplicable. There is another theory which states that this has already happened. Blaster. In the late 1970s, the role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons became a popular obsession among the global tribe of geeks. Elon, Kimball, and their Rive cousins immersed themselves in the game, which involves sitting around a table and guided by character sheets and the roll of dice, embarking on fantasy adventures. One of the players serves as the dungeon master, refereeing the action. Elon usually played the dungeon master and, surprisingly, did it with gentleness. Even as a kid, Elon had a whole bunch of different demeanors and moods, says his cousin Peter Rive. As a dungeon master, he was incredibly patient, which is not, in my experience, always his default personality, if you know what I mean. It happens sometimes, and it's so beautiful when it does. Instead of pressuring his brother and cousins, he would turn very analytical to describe the options they had in each situation. Together, they entered a tournament in Johannesburg, at which they were the youngest players. The tournament's dungeon master assigned their mission. You have to save this woman by figuring out who in the game is the bad guy and killing him. Elon looked at the dungeon master and said, "I think you're the bad guy." And so they killed him. Elon was right, and the game, which was supposed to last a few hours, was over. The organizers accused them of somehow cheating and at first tried to deny them the prize. But Musk prevailed. "These guys were idiots," he says. "It was so obvious." Musk saw his first computer around the time he turned 11. He was in a shopping mall in Johannesburg, and he stood there for minutes just staring at it. "I had read computer magazines," he says, "but I had never actually seen a computer before." As with the motorcycle, he hounded his father to get him one. Errol was bizarrely averse to computers, claiming they were good only for time-wasting games, not engineering. So Elon saved his money from odd jobs and bought a Commodore VIC-20, one of the earliest personal computers. It could play games such as Galaxian and Alpha Blaster, in which a player attempts to protect Earth from alien invaders. The computer came with a course in how to program in BASIC that involved 60 hours of lessons. "I did it in 3 days, barely sleeping," he remembers. A few months later, he tore out an ad for a conference on personal computers at a university and told his father he wanted to attend. Again, his father balked. It was an expensive seminar, about $400, and not meant for children. Elon replied that it was essential and just stood next to his father staring. Over the next few days, Elon would pull the ad out of his pocket and renew his demand. Finally, his father was able to talk the university into giving a discounted price for Elon to stand in the back. When Errol came to pick him up at the end, he found Elon engaging with 3 of the professors. "This boy must get a new computer," one of them declared. After he aced a programming skills test at his school, he got an IBM PC/XT and taught himself to program using Pascal and Turbo C++. At age 13, he was able to create a video game, which he named Blaster, using 123 lines of BASIC and some simple assembly language to get the graphics to work. He submitted it to PC and Office Technology magazine, and it appeared in the December 1984 issue with a short introduction explaining, "In this game, you have to destroy an alien space freighter, which is carrying deadly hydrogen bombs and status beam machines." Although it's unclear what a status beam machine is, the concept sounds cool. The magazine paid him $500, and he proceeded to sell it 2 other games, one like Donkey Kong and the other simulating roulette and blackjack. Thus began a lifelong addiction to video games. If you're playing with Elon, you play pretty much non-stop until finally you have to eat, Peter Rive says. On one trip to Durban, Elon figured out how to hack the games in a mall. He was able to hotwire the system so that they could play for hours without using any coins. He then came up with a grander idea. The cousins could create a video game arcade of their own. "We knew exactly which games were the most popular, so it seemed like a sure thing," Elon says. He figured out how the cash flow could finance the machines. But when the boys tried to get the city permits, they were told they needed someone over 18 to sign the application. Kimball, who had filled out the 30 pages of forms, decided that they couldn't ask Errol. "He was just too hard of a human," Kimball says. "So we went to Russ and Pete's dad, and he flipped out. That basically shut the whole thing down." 5. Escape velocity. Jekyll and Hyde. At age 17, after 7 years of living with his father, Elon realized that he would have to escape. Life with him had become increasingly unnerving. There were times when Errol would be jovial and fun, but occasionally he would become dark, verbally abusive, and possessed by fantasies and conspiracies. His mood could change on a dime, Tosca says. Everything could be super, then within a second he would be vicious and spewing abuse. It was almost as if he had a split personality. One minute he would be super friendly, Kimball says, and the next he would be screaming at you, lecturing you for hours, literally 2 or 3 hours while he forced you to just stand there, calling you worthless, pathetic, making scarring and evil comments, not allowing you to leave. Elon's cousins became reluctant to visit. You never knew what you were in for, Peter Rives says. Sometimes Errol would be like, I just got us some new motorbikes, so let's jump on them. At other times he would be angry and threatening and, oh fuck, make you clean the toilets with a toothbrush? When Peter tells me this, he pauses for a moment and then, a bit hesitantly, notes that Elon sometimes has similar mood swings. When Elon's in a good mood, it's like the coolest, funnest thing in the world. And when he's in a bad mood, he goes really dark and you're just walking on eggshells. One day Peter came over to the house and found Errol sitting in his underwear at the kitchen table with a plastic roulette wheel. He was trying to see whether microwaves could affect it. He would spin the wheel, mark down the result, then spin it and put it in a microwave oven and record the result. It was nuts, Peter says. Errol had become convinced that he could find a system for beating the game. He dragged Elon to the Pretoria casino many times, dressing him up so that he looked older than 16, and had him write down the numbers while Errol used a calculator hidden under a betting card. Elon went to the library and read a few books on roulette and even wrote a roulette simulation program on his computer. He then tried to convince his father that none of his schemes would work, but Errol believed that he had found a deeper truth about probability and, as he later described it to me, an almost total solution to what is called randomness. When I asked him to explain it, he said, there are no random events or chance. All events follow the Fibonacci sequence, like the Mandelbrot set. I went on to discover the relationship between chance and the Fibonacci sequence. This is the subject for a scientific paper. If I share it, all activities relying on chance will be ruined, so I am in doubt as to doing that. I'm not quite sure what all that means. Neither is Elon. I don't know how he went from being great at engineering to believing in witchcraft, but he somehow made that evolution. Errol can be very forceful and occasionally convincing. He changes reality around him, Kimball says. He will literally make up things, but he actually believes his own false reality. Sometimes Errol would make sweeping assertions to his kids that were unconnected to facts, such as insisting that in the United States the president is considered divine and cannot be criticized. At other times, he would weave fanciful tales that cast himself as either the hero or the victim. All would be asserted with such conviction that Elon and Kimball would find themselves questioning their own view of reality. Can you imagine growing up like that? Kimball asks. It was mental torture, and it infects you. You end up asking, what is reality? I found myself getting caught up in Errol's tangled web. In a series of calls and emails over the course of 2 years, he gave me varying accounts of his relationship with and his feelings for his kids, May, and his stepdaughter, with whom he would have 2 children. More on that later. Elon and Kimball have developed their own narrative about what I was like, and it doesn't accord with the facts, he claims. Their tales about him being psychologically abusive, he insists, are told to please their mother. But when I press him, he tells me to go with their version. I don't care if they choose a different narrative, as long as they are happy. I have no desire for it to be my word versus theirs. Let them have the floor. When talking about his father, Elon will sometimes let loose a laugh, a somewhat harsh and bitter one. It's similar to the laugh that his father has. Some of the words Elon uses, the way he stares, his sudden transitions from light to dark to light, remind his family members of the Errol simmering inside of him. I would see shades of these horrible stories Elon told me surface in his own behavior, says Justine, Elon's first wife. It made me realize how difficult it is not to be shaped by what we grew up with, even when that's not what we want. Every now and then, she dared to say something like, "You're turning into your father." She explains, it was our code phrase to warn him that he was going into the realm of darkness. But Justine says that Elon, who was always emotionally invested in their children, is different from his father in a fundamental way. With Errol, there was a sense that really bad things could happen around him. Whereas if the zombie apocalypse happened, you'd want to be on Elon's team, because he would figure out a way to get those zombies in line. He can be very harsh, but at the end of the day, you can trust him to find a way to prevail. In order for that to happen, he had to move on. It was time to leave South Africa. A one-way ticket. Musk began pushing both his mother and father, trying to convince them to move to the United States and take him and his siblings. Neither was interested. So then I was like, well, I'm just going to go by myself, he says. He first tried to get U.S. citizenship on the grounds that his mother's father had been born in Minnesota, but that failed because his mother had been born in Canada and had never claimed U.S. citizenship. So he concluded that getting to Canada might be an easier first step. He went to the Canadian consulate on his own, got application forms for a passport, and filled them out not only for himself but for his mother, brother, and sister, but not father. The approvals came through in late May 1989. I would have left the next morning, but airline tickets were cheaper back then if you bought them 14 days in advance, he says, so I had to wait those 2 weeks. On June 11, 1989, about 2 weeks shy of his 18th birthday, he had dinner at Pretoria's finest restaurant, Cynthia's, with his father and siblings, who then drove him to the Johannesburg airport. You'll be back in a few months, Elon says his father told him contemptuously. You'll never be successful. As usual, Errol has his own version of the story, in which he was the action hero. According to him, Elon became seriously depressed during his senior year of high school. His despair reached a head on Republic Day, May 31st, 1989. His family was preparing to watch the parade, but Elon refused to get out of bed. His father leaned against the big desk in Elon's room, with its well-used computer, and asked, "Do you want to go and study in America?" Elon perked up. "Yes," he answered. Errol claims, "It was my idea. Up until then, he had never said that he wanted to go to America. So I said, well, tomorrow you should go and see the American cultural attaché, who was a friend of mine from Rotary." His father's account, Elon says, was just another of his elaborate fantasies casting him as the hero. In this case, it was provably false. By Republic Day 1989, Elon had already gotten a Canadian passport and purchased his airline ticket. 6. Canada. Immigrant. A myth has grown that Musk, because his father was on and off successful, arrived in North America in 1989 with a lot of money, perhaps pockets filled with emeralds. Errol at times encouraged that perception. But in fact, what Errol got from the Zambian emerald mine had become worthless years earlier. When Elon left South Africa, his father gave him $2,000 in traveler's checks, and his mother provided him with another $2,000 by cashing out a stock account she had opened with the money she won in a beauty contest as a teenager. Otherwise, what he mainly had with him when he arrived in Montreal was a list of his mother's relatives he had never met. He planned to call his mother's uncle, but discovered that he had left Montreal. So he went to a youth hostel, where he shared a room with 5 other people. "I was used to South Africa, where people will just rob and kill you," he says. "So I slept on my backpack until I realized that not everyone was a murderer." He wandered the town marveling that people did not have bars on their windows. After a week, he bought a $100 Greyhound Discovery Pass that allowed him to travel by bus anywhere in Canada for 6 months. He had a second cousin his age, Mark Tulin, who lived on a farm in Saskatchewan province not far from Moose Jaw, where his grandparents had lived, so he headed there. It was more than 1,700 miles from Montreal. The bus, which stopped at every hamlet, took days to wander across Canada. At one stop, he got off to find lunch and, just as the bus was leaving, ran to jump back on. Unfortunately, the driver had taken off his suitcase with his traveler's checks and clothes. All he had now was the knapsack of books he carried everywhere. The difficulty of getting traveler's checks replaced, it took weeks, was an early taste of how the financial payments system needed disruption. When he got to the town near his cousin's farm, he used some of the change he had in his pocket to call. "Hey, it's Elon, your cousin from South Africa," he said. "I'm at the bus station." The cousin showed up with his father, took him to a Sizzler steakhouse, and invited him to stay at their wheat farm, where he was put to work cleaning grain bins and helping to raise a barn. There he celebrated his 18th birthday with a cake they baked with "Happy Birthday, Elon," written in chocolate icing. After 6 weeks, he got back on the bus and headed for Vancouver, another 1,000 miles away, to stay with his mother's half-brother. When he went to an employment office, he saw that most jobs paid $5 an hour. But there was one that paid $18 an hour, cleaning out the boilers in the lumber mill. This involved donning a hazmat suit and shimmying through a small tunnel that led to the chamber where the wood pulp was being boiled while shoveling out the lime that had caked on the walls. If the person at the end of the tunnel didn't remove the goo fast enough, you would be trapped while sweating your guts out, he recalls. It was like a Dickensian steampunk nightmare filled with dark pipes and the sound of jackhammers. May in Tosca. While Elon was in Vancouver, May Musk flew from South Africa, having decided that she wanted to move as well. She sent back scouting reports to Tosca. Vancouver was too cold and rainy, she wrote. Montreal was exciting, but people there spoke French. Toronto, she concluded, was where they should go. Tosca promptly sold their house and furniture in South Africa. Then she joined their mother in Toronto, where Elon also moved. Kimball stayed behind in Pretoria to finish his last year in high school. At first, they all lived in a one-bedroom apartment, with Tosca and her mother sharing a bed while Elon slept on the couch. There was little money. May remembers crying when she spilled some milk because she didn't have enough to buy any more. Tosca got a job at a hamburger joint, Elon as an intern in Microsoft's Toronto office, and May at the university, a modeling agency, and as a diet consultant. I worked every day and also 4 nights a week, she says. I took off one afternoon, Sunday, to do the laundry and get groceries. I didn't even know what my kids were doing because I was hardly at home. After a few months, they were making enough money to afford a rent-controlled 3-bedroom apartment. It had felt wallpaper, which May insisted that Elon ripped down, and a horrid carpet. They were going to buy a $200 replacement carpet, but Tosca insisted on a thicker one for $300 because Kimball and their cousin Peter were coming over to join them and would sleep on the floor. Their second big purchase was a computer for Elon. He had no friends or social life in Toronto, and he spent most of his time reading or working on the computer. Tosca, on the contrary, was a saucy teenager, eager to go out. "I'm coming with you," Elon would declare, not wanting to be lonely. "No, you're not," she would reply. But when he insisted, she ordered, "You have to stay 10 feet away from me at all times." He did. He would walk behind her and her friends, carrying a book to read whenever they went into a club or party. 7. Queens. Industrial relations. Musk's college admissions test scores were not especially notable. On his second round of the SAT tests, he got a 670 out of 800 on his verbal exam and a 730 on math. He narrowed his choices to 2 universities that were an easy drive from Toronto, Waterloo and Queens. Waterloo was definitely better for engineering, but it didn't seem great from a social standpoint, he says. There were few girls there. He felt he knew computer science and engineering as well as any of the professors at both places, but he desperately desired a social life. "I didn't want to spend my undergraduate time with a bunch of dudes." So in the fall of 1990, he enrolled at Queens. He was placed on the international floor of one of the dorms, where, on the first day, he met a student named Naved Farouk, who became his first real and lasting friend outside of his family. Farouk's father was Pakistani and his mother Canadian, and he was raised in Nigeria and Switzerland, where his parents worked for United Nations organizations. Like Elon, he had made no close friends in high school. At Queens, he and Musk quickly bonded over their interests in computer and board games, obscure history, and science fiction. "For me and Elon," Farouk says, "it was probably the first place we were socially accepted and could be ourselves." During his first year, Musk got A's in business, economics, calculus, and computer programming, but he got B's in accounting, Spanish, and industrial relations. The following year, he took another course in industrial relations, which studies the dealings between workers and management. Again, he got a B. He later told the Queen's Alumni magazine that the most important thing he learned during his 2 years there was how to work collaboratively with smart people and make use of the Socratic method to achieve commonality of purpose, a skill, like those of industrial relations, that future colleagues would notice had been only partly honed. He was more interested in late-night philosophy discussions about the meaning of life. I was really hungry for that, he says, because until then I had no friends I could talk to about these things. But most of all, he became immersed, with Farouk at his side, in the world of board and computer games. Strategy games. What you're doing is not rational, Musk explained in his flat monotone. You're actually hurting yourself. He and Farouk were playing the strategy board game Diplomacy with friends in their dorm, and one of the players was allying himself with another against Musk. If you do this, I will turn your allies against you and inflict pain on you. Musk tended to win, Farouk says, by being convincing in his negotiations and threats. Musk had enjoyed all types of video games as a teenager in South Africa, including first-person shooters and adventure quests, but at college he became more focused on the genre known as strategy games, ones that involved two or more players competing to build an empire using high-level strategy, resource management, supply chain logistics, and tactical thinking. Strategy games, those played on a board and then those for computers, would become central to Musk's life. From the ancient art of war, which he played as a teen in South Africa, to his addiction to the Battle of Polytopia 3 decades later, he relished the complex planning and competitive management of resources that are required to prevail. Immersing himself in these games for hours became the way he relaxed, escaped stress, and honed his tactical skills and strategic thinking for business. While he was at Queen's, the first great computer-based strategy game was released, Civilization. In it, players compete to build a society from prehistory to the present by choosing what technologies to develop and production facilities to build. Musk moved his desk so that he could sit on his bed and Farouk on a chair to face off and play the game. We completely entered a zone for hours until we were exhausted, Farouk says. They moved on to Warcraft, Orcs and Humans, where a key part of the strategy is to develop a sustainable supply of resources, such as metals from mines. After hours of playing, they would take a break for a meal, and Elon would describe the moment in the game when he knew he was going to win. I am wired for war, he told Farouk. One class at Queen's used a strategy game in which teams competed in a simulation of growing a business. The players could decide the prices of their products, the amount spent on advertising, what profits to plow back into research, and other variables. Musk figured out how to reverse engineer the logic that controlled the simulation, so he was able to win every time. Bank trainee. When Kimball moved to Canada and joined Elon as a student at Queen's, the brothers developed a routine. They would read the newspaper and pick out the person they found most interesting. Elon was not one of those eager beaver types who liked to attract and charm mentors, so the more gregarious Kimball took the lead in cold calling the person. If we were able to get through on the phone, they usually would have lunch with us, he says. One they picked was Peter Nicholson, the executive in charge of strategic planning at Scotiabank. Nicholson was an engineer with a master's degree in physics and a PhD in math. When Kimball got through to him, he agreed to have lunch with the boys. Their mother took them shopping at Eaton's department store, where the purchase of a $99 suit got you a free shirt and tie. At lunch, they discussed philosophy and physics and the nature of the universe. Nicholson offered them summer jobs, inviting Elon to work directly with him on his 3-person strategic planning team. Nicholson, then 49, and Elon had fun together solving math puzzles and weird equations. I was interested in the philosophical side of physics and how it related to reality, Nicholson says. I didn't have a lot of other people to talk to about these things. They also discussed what had become Musk's passion, space travel. When Elon went with Nicholson's daughter, Christy, to a party one evening, his first question was, "Do you ever think about electric cars?" As he later admitted, it was not the world's best come online. One topic Musk researched for Nicholson was Latin American debt. Banks had made billions in loans to countries such as Brazil and Mexico that could not be repaid, and in 1989 the U.S. Treasury Secretary, Nicholas Brady, packaged these debt obligations into tradable securities known as Brady bonds. Because these bonds were backed by the U.S. government, Musk believed that they would always be worth 50 cents on the dollar. However, some were selling as low as 20 cents. Musk figured that Scotiabank could make billions by buying the bonds at that cheap price, and he called the Goldman Sachs trading desk in New York to make sure they were available. "Yeah, how much you want?" the gruff trader on the phone responded. "Would it be possible to get $5 million?" Musk asked, putting on a deep and serious voice. When the trader said that would be no problem, Musk quickly hung up. I was like, jackpot, no lose proposition here, he says. I ran to tell Peter about it and thought they would give me some money to do it, but the bank rejected the idea. The CEO said it already held too much Latin American debt. Wow, this is just insane, Musk said to himself. Is this how banks think? Nicholson says that Scotiabank was navigating the Latin American debt situation, using its own methods, which worked better. He came away with an impression that the bank was a lot dumber than in fact it was, Nicholson says. But that was a good thing, because it gave him a healthy disrespect for the financial industry and the audacity to eventually start what became PayPal. Musk also drew another lesson from his time at Scotiabank. He did not like, nor was he good at, working for other people. It was not in his nature to be deferential or to assume that others might know more than he did. 8. Physics. Musk got bored at Queen's. It was beautiful, but not academically challenging. So when one of his classmates transferred to the University of Pennsylvania, he decided to see if he could do so as well. Money was a problem. His father was providing no support, and his mother was juggling 3 jobs to make ends meet. But Penn offered him a $14,000 scholarship plus a student loan package. So in 1992, he transferred there for his junior year. He decided to major in physics because, like his father, he was drawn to engineering. The essence of being an engineer, he felt, was to address any problem by drilling down to the most fundamental tenets of physics. He also decided to pursue a joint degree in business. I was concerned that if I didn't study business, I would be forced to work for someone who did, he says. My goal was to engineer products by having a feel for the physics and never have to work for a boss with a business degree. Even though he was neither political nor gregarious, he ran for student assembly. One of his campaign pledges poked fun at those who sought student office in order to polish their resumes. The final promise of his campaign platform was, if this position ever appears on my resume, to stand on my head and eat 50 copies of the offending document in a public place. Fortunately, he lost, which saved him from falling in with the student government types, a world for which he was temperamentally unsuited. Instead, he fit comfortably into a crowd of geeks who liked making clever jokes involving scientific forces, playing Dungeons and Dragons, binging on video games, and writing computer code. His closest friend in this crowd was Robin Wren, who had won a physics Olympiad in his native China before coming to Penn. He was the only person better than me at physics, Musk says. They became partners in the physics lab, where they studied how the properties of various materials change at extreme temperatures. At the end of one set of experiments, Musk took erasers from the ends of pencils, dropped them into a jar of super-cold liquid, then smashed them on the floor. He developed an interest in knowing and being able to visualize the properties of materials and alloys at different temperatures. Wren recalls that Musk focused on the 3 areas that would shape his career. Whether he was calibrating the force of gravity or analyzing the properties of materials, he would discuss with Wren how the laws of physics applied to building rockets. He kept talking about making a rocket that could go to Mars, Wren recalls. Of course, I didn't pay much attention because I thought he was fantasizing. Musk also focused on electric cars. He and Wren would grab lunch from one of the food trucks and sit on the campus lawn, where Musk would read academic papers on batteries. California had just passed a requirement mandating that 10% of vehicles by 2003 had to be electric. I want to go make that happen, Musk said. Musk also became convinced that solar power, which in 1994 was just taking off, was the best path towards sustainable energy. His senior paper was titled The Importance of Being Solar. He was motivated not just by the dangers of climate change, but also by the fact that fossil fuel reserves would start to dwindle. Society will soon have no option but to focus on renewable power sources, he wrote. His final page showed a power station of the future, involving a satellite with mirrors that would concentrate sunlight onto solar panels and send the resulting electricity back to Earth via a microwave beam. The professor gave him a grade of 98, saying it was a very interesting and well-written paper, except the last figure that comes out of the blue. Party animal. Throughout his life, Musk had 3 ways of escaping the emotional drama that he tended to generate. The first was the one that he shared with Navaid Farouk at Queens, an ability to zone out on empire-building strategy games, such as Civilization and Polytopia. Robinson reflected another facet of Musk, the encyclopedia reader who liked to immerse himself in, as the Hitchhiker's Guide put it, life, the universe, and everything. At Penn, he developed a third mode of relaxation, a taste for partying, that drew him out of the lonely shell that had surrounded him as a kid. His partner and enabler was a fun-loving social animal named Adio Ressi, a tall guy with a big head, laugh, and personality. Ressi was an Italian-American from Manhattan who loved nightclubs. An offbeat character, he started an environmental newspaper called Green Times and attempted to create his own major called Revolution, with copies of the newspaper as his senior thesis. Like Musk, Ressi was a transfer student, so they were put in the freshman dorm, where there were rules against parties and visitors after 10 p.m. Neither of them liked following rules, so they rented a house in a sketchy part of West Philadelphia. Ressi came up with a scheme to throw big monthly parties. They covered the windows and decorated the house with black lights and phosphorescent posters. At one point, Musk discovered that his desk had been painted in lacquered glow-in-the-dark colors and nailed to the wall by Ressi, who called it an art installation. Musk took it down and declared that, no, it was a desk. At a junkyard, they found a metal sculpture of a horse's head and put a red light inside, so beams darted out of its eyes. There was a band on one floor, a DJ on another, tables with beer and jello shots, and someone at the door to collect the $5 entrance fee. On some nights, they would draw 500 people, which would easily pay the rent for a month. When May visited, she was appalled. I filled 8 garbage bags and swept the place, and I thought they would be grateful, she says, but they didn't even notice. At their party that night, they stationed her in Elon's bedroom near the front door to check coats and guard the money. She kept a pair of scissors in her hand, which she thought she could use on anyone who tried to steal the cash box, and she moved Elon's mattress next to one of the exterior walls. The house was shaking and bouncing so much from the music that I thought a ceiling might collapse, so I figured if I was at the edge I'd be safer. Although Elon loved the vibe of the parties, he never got fully immersed in them. I was stone cold sober at the time, he says. Adio would get wasted. I'd be banging on his door and say, like, dude, you've got to come up and manage the party. I ended up being the one who had to keep an eye on things. Ressi later marveled that Musk usually seemed a bit detached. He enjoyed being around a party, but not fully in it. The only thing he binged on was video games. Despite all of their partying, he understood that Musk was fundamentally alienated and withdrawn, like an observer from a different planet trying to learn the motions of sociability. I wish Elon knew how to be a little happier, he says. 9. Go West. Summer intern. At Ivy League schools in the 1990s, ambitious students were tugged either east toward the gilded realms of Wall Street banking or west toward the tech utopianism and entrepreneurial zeal of Silicon Valley. At Penn, Musk received some internship offers from Wall Street, all lucrative, but finance did not interest him. He felt that bankers and lawyers did not contribute much to society. Besides, he disliked the students he met in business classes. Instead, he was drawn to Silicon Valley. It was the decade of rational exuberance, when one could just slap a .com onto any fantasy and wait for the thunder of Porsches to descend from Sand Hill Road with venture capitalists waving checks. He got his opportunity in the summer of 1994, between his junior and senior years at Penn, when he scored 2 internships that allowed him to indulge his passions for electric vehicles, space, and video games. By day, he worked at Pinnacle Research Institute, a 20-person group that had modest Defense Department contracts to study a supercapacitor developed by its founder. A capacitor is a device that can briefly hold an electric charge and discharge it quickly, and Pinnacle thought that it could make one that was powerful enough to provide energy for electric cars and space-based weapons. In a paper he wrote at the end of the summer, Musk declared, "It is important to note that the ultracapacitor is not simply an incremental improvement, but a radically new technology." In the evening, he worked at a small Palo Alto company called Rocket Science, which made video games. When he showed up at their building one night and asked for a summer job, they gave him a problem they hadn't been able to solve. how to coax a computer to multitask by reading graphics that were stored on a CD-ROM while simultaneously moving an avatar on the screen. He went on internet message boards to ask other hackers how to bypass the BIOS and joystick reader using DOS. None of the senior engineers had been able to solve this problem, and I solved it in 2 weeks, he says. They were impressed and wanted him to work full-time, but he needed to graduate in order to get a U.S. work visa. In addition, he came to a realization. He had a fanatic love of video games and the skills to make money creating them, but that was not the best way to spend his life. I wanted to have more impact, he says. King of the road. One unfortunate trend in the 1980s was that cars and computers became tightly sealed appliances. It was possible to open up and fiddle with the innards of the Apple II that Steve Wozniak designed in the late 1970s, but you couldn't do that with the Macintosh, which Steve Jobs in 1984 made almost impossible to open. Similarly, kids in the 1970s and earlier grew up rummaging under the hoods of cars, tinkering with the carburetors, changing spark plugs, and souping up the engines. They had a fingertip feel for valves and valvoline. This hands-on imperative and Heathkit mindset even applied to radios and television sets. If you wanted, you could change the tubes and later the transistors and have a feel for how a circuit board worked. This trend toward closed and sealed devices meant that most techies who came of age in the 1990s gravitated to software more than hardware. They never knew the sweet smell of a soldering iron, but they could code in ways that made circuits sing. Musk was different. He liked hardware as well as software. He could code, but he also had a feel for physical components, such as battery cells and capacitors, valves and combustion chambers, fuel pumps and fan belts. In particular, Musk loved fiddling with cars. At the time, he owned a 20-year-old BMW 300i, and he spent Saturdays rummaging around junkyards in Philadelphia to score the parts he needed to soup it up. It had a 4-speed transmission, but he decided to upgrade it when BMW started making a 5-speed. Borrowing the lift at a local repair shop, he was able, with a couple of shims and a little bit of grinding, to jam a 5-speed transmission into what had been a 4-speed car. It was really able to haul ass, he recalls. He and Kimball drove the car from Palo Alto back to Philadelphia at the end of the summer of internships in 1994. We both were, like, university sucks, there's no hurry to get back, Kimball recalls. So we did a 3-week road trip. The car broke down repeatedly. On one occasion, they were able to get it to a dealership in Colorado Springs, but after the repairs it failed again. So they pushed it to a truck stop where Elon successfully reworked everything the professional mechanic had done. Musk also took the BMW on a trip with his college girlfriend at the time, Jennifer Gwynn. Over Christmas break in 1994, they drove from Philadelphia to Queen's University, where Kimball was still studying, and then to Toronto to see his mother. There he gave Jennifer a small gold necklace with a smooth green emerald. His mom had a number of these necklaces in a case in her bedroom, and Elon told me they were from his father's emerald mine in South Africa. He pulled one from the case, Jennifer noted 25 years later, when she auctioned it online. In fact, the long bankrupt mine had not been in South Africa and was not owned by his father, but at the time Musk didn't mind giving that impression. When he graduated in the spring of 1995, Musk decided to take another cross-country trip to Silicon Valley. He brought along Robin Wren, after teaching him how to drive a stick shift. They stopped at the just-opened Denver airport because Musk wanted to see the baggage handling system. He was fascinated by how they designed the robotic machines to handle the luggage without human intervention, Wren says. But the system was a mess. Musk took away a lesson he would have to relearn when he built highly robotic Tesla factories. It was over-automated, and they underestimated the complexity of what they were building, he says. Internet wave. Musk planned to enroll at Stanford at the end of the summer to study material science as a graduate student. Still fascinated by capacitors, he wanted to research how they might power electric cars. The idea was to leverage advanced chip-making equipment to make a solid-state ultracapacitor with enough energy density to give a car long range, he says. But as he got closer to enrolling, he began to worry. I figured I could spend several years at Stanford, get a PhD, and my conclusion on capacitors would be that they aren't feasible, he says. Most PhDs are irrelevant. The number that actually moved the needle is almost none. He had conceived by then a life vision that he would repeat like a mantra. I thought about the things that will truly affect humanity, he says. I came up with 3: the internet, sustainable energy, and space travel. In the summer of 1995, it became clear to him that the first of these, the internet, was not going to wait for him to finish graduate school. The web had just been opened up for commercial use, and that August the browser startup Netscape went public, soaring within a day to a market value of $2.9 billion. Musk had come up with an idea for an internet company during his final year at Penn, when an executive from 9X came to speak about the phone company's plans to launch an online version of the Yellow Pages. Dubbed Big Yellow, it would have interactive features so that users could tailor the information to their personal needs, the executive said. Musk thought, correctly, as it turned out, that 9X had no clue how to make it truly interactive. Why don't we do it ourselves? He suggested to Kimball, and he began writing code that could combine business listings with map data. They dubbed it the Virtual City Navigator. Just before the enrollment deadline for Stanford, Musk went to Toronto to get advice from Peter Nicholson of Scotiabank. Should he pursue the idea for the Virtual City Navigator, or should he start the PhD program? Nicholson, who had a PhD from Stanford, did not equivocate. The internet revolution only comes once in a lifetime, so strike while the iron is hot, he told Musk as they walked along the shore of Lake Ontario. You will have lots of time to go to graduate school later if you're still interested. When Musk got back to Palo Alto, he told Rin he had made up his mind. I need to put everything else on hold, he said. I need to catch the internet wave. He actually hedged his bets. He officially enrolled at Stanford and then immediately requested a deferral. I've written some software with the first internet maps and Yellow Pages directory, he told Bill Nix, the material science professor. I will probably fail, and if so I would like to come back. Nix said it would not be a problem for Musk to defer his studies, but he predicted that he would never come back. 10.zip2. MapQuests. Some of the best innovations come from combining 2 previous innovations. The idea that Elon and Kimball had in early 1995, just as the web was starting to grow exponentially, was simple. Put a searchable directory of businesses online and combine it with map software that would give users directions to them. Not everyone saw the potential. When Kimball had a meeting at the Toronto Star, which published the Yellow Pages in that city, the president picked up a thick edition of the directory and threw it at him. Do you honestly think you're ever going to replace this? He asked. The brothers rented a tiny office in Palo Alto that had room for 2 desks and futons. For the first 6 months, they slept in the office and showered at the YMCA. Kimball, who would later become a chef and restaurateur, got an electric coil and cooked meals occasionally. But mainly they ate at Jack in the Box, because it was cheap, open 24 hours, and just a block away. I can still tell you every single menu item, Kimball says. It's just seared into my brain. Elon became a fan of the teriyaki bowl. After a few months, they rented an unfurnished apartment that stayed that way. All it had was 2 mattresses and lots of Cocoa Puffs boxes, says Tosca. Even after they moved in, Elon spent many nights in the office, crashing under his desk when he was exhausted from coding. He had no pillow. He had no sleeping bag. I don't know how he did it, says Jim Ambrose, an early employee. Once in a while, if we had a customer meeting in the morning, I'd have to tell him to go home and shower. Naved Farouk came from Toronto to work with them, but he soon found himself in fights with Musk. If you want your friendship to last, his wife Naim told him, this is not for you. So he quit after 6 weeks. I knew that I could either be working with him or be his friend, but not both, and the latter seemed more enjoyable. Elon Musk, not yet estranged from his sons, visited from South Africa and gave them $28,000 plus a beat-up car he bought for $500. Their mother, May, came from Toronto more often, bringing food and clothes. She gave them $10,000 and let them use her credit card because they had not been approved for one. They got their first break when they visited Navtech, which had a database of maps. The company agreed to license it to the Musks for free until they started making a profit. Elon wrote a program that merged the maps with a listing of businesses in the area. You could use your cursor and zoom in and move around the map, says Kimball. That stuff is totally normal today, but it was mind-blowing to see that at the time. I think Elon and I were the first humans to see it work on the internet. They named the company Zip2, as in zip to where you want to go. Elon was granted a patent for the interactive network directory service that he had created. The invention provides a network-accessible service which integrates both a business directory and a map database, the patent stated. For their first meeting with potential investors, they had to take a bus up Sand Hill Road because the car their dad had given them broke down. But after word spread about the company, the VCs were asking to come to them. They bought a big frame for a computer rack and put one of their small computers inside, so that visitors would think they had a giant server. They named it the Machine That Goes Ping, after a Monty Python sketch. Every time investors would come in, we showed them the tower, Kimball says, and we would laugh because it made them think we were doing hardcore stuff. May flew from Toronto to help prepare for the meetings with venture capitalists, often staying up all night at Kinko's to print the presentations. It was $1 a page for color, which we could barely afford, she says. We would all be exhausted except Elon. He was always up late doing the coding. When they got their first proposals from potential investors in early 1996, May took her boys to a nice restaurant to celebrate. "That's the last time we'll have to use my credit card," she said when she paid the bill. And it was. They were soon astounded by an offer from More Davidoff Ventures to invest $3 million in the company. The final presentation to the firm was scheduled for a Monday, and that weekend Kimball decided to make a quick trip to Toronto to fix their mother's computer, which had broken. "We love our mom," he explains. As he was leaving on Sunday to fly back to San Francisco, he got stopped by U.S. border officials at the airport who looked in his luggage and saw the pitch deck, business cards, and other documents for the company. Because he did not have a U.S. work visa, they wouldn't let him board the plane. He had a friend pick him up at the airport and drive him across the border, where he told a less vigilant border officer that they were heading down to see the David Letterman show. He managed to catch the late plane from Buffalo to San Francisco and made it in time for the pitch. More Davidoff loved the presentation and finalized the investment. The firm also found an immigration lawyer to help the two Musks get work visas and gave them each $30,000 to purchase cars. Elon bought a 1967 Jaguar E-Type. As a kid in South Africa, he had seen a picture of the car in a book on the best convertibles ever made, and he had vowed to buy one if he ever struck it rich. "It was the most beautiful car you could imagine," he says, "but it broke down at least once a week." The venture capitalists soon did what they often do: bring in adult supervision to take over from the young founders. It had happened to Steve Jobs at Apple and to Larry Page and Sergey Brin at Google. Rich Sorkin, who had run business development for an audio equipment company, was made the CEO of Zip2. Elon was moved aside to Chief Technology Officer. At first, he thought the change would suit him. He could focus on building the product. But he learned a lesson. "I never wanted to be a CEO," he says, "but I learned that you could not truly be the Chief Technology or Product Officer unless you were the CEO." With the changes came a new strategy. Instead of marketing its product directly to businesses and their customers, Zip2 focused on selling its software to big newspapers so they could make their own local directories. This made sense. Newspapers already had sales forces that were knocking on the doors of businesses to sell them advertising and classifieds. Knight Ridder, the New York Times, Pulitzer, and Hearst newspapers signed up. Executives from the first two joined the Zip2 board. Editor and Publisher magazine ran a cover story titled "Newspaperdom's New Superhero, Zip2," reporting that the company had created a new suite of software structures that would enable individual